Okay, Spencer from Sugar City says, what's the alternative to fractional reserve banking? Well, that's a deep question. Incidentally, for those of you who are curious about more of these ideas, I would point you to Mises.org. I'll just type that in the chat box. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, but that's the website for the Mises Institute, where I'm an adjunct scholar. And so the sort of ideas I've been talking about all night, you can go read commentary on the news and scholarly works and so forth, and see lecture series and stuff there if you want to go read more. But to answer your question, the alternative would be 100% reserve banking, where if it's a checking account and you put your money with the bank, then that's your money and they don't go lend it out. And so you wouldn't earn interest on that, since that's how the bank can pay you interest on a checking account, is that they lend it out. So if it's 100% reserves, you probably would actually have to pay the bank a small fee. Like, maybe you pay them a certain amount per year, or, every time you write a check, maybe they take a 2 cents or something for processing fees. But the point is, the way you would not have that fractional reserve system is that if you want your bank just to house your money, if it's really just a safe keeping place for your money, like you just don't want to walk around with a bunch of money on you because you might get mugged, then they should just put it in the vault and have a bunch of guards, and that's what their job is. Just like people make an analogy, when you store your furniture in a storage facility, you put your couch and your TV and so on in there, and the owner, gives you a receipt or what have you, he doesn't go out and say, well, I bet you I can rent this couch out to somebody else, and as long as I get the couch back before the owner shows up, everything's good. No, you would think that, what are you doing? I wanted you to safeguard my stuff. So that's the thing, too, with checking accounts, that if we want, if you're putting your money with the bank thinking that's my money on deposit, and I have a checkbook and I might, write a check or use my debit card, that the bank shouldn't be lending that out. That's the rationale behind people promoting what's called 100% reserve banking. Now, if you want to earn interest, then you can still do that, but it would be like a savings account. You could, or what's called a time deposit. You could buy a CD from the bank or put it in an account, a savings account that pays 5% interest, but you can't touch your money for a year. And then the bank could take that and lend it out to somebody at 10% interest, and that's how the bank makes its money. All right, so that's, again, I'm very quick analogies and so forth because it's a deep concept, but that's the idea. So if all banks did that, then banks wouldn't be vulnerable to runs. Okay, so Andrea says, if that was the case, what would happen if prices went up, or would prices not inflate at the same rate? Right, you're right, that you've seen it. So the people who, and I'm one of, I don't want to be coy, I'm one of the people who is uncomfortable with fractional reserve banking. I think it's an odd system. And incidentally, I would argue that was one of the reasons historically that the Federal Reserve was created. So I don't think that the Fed was created by a bunch of progressive thinkers who wanted to just save America from the bankers. If you go and look at the history, the people who were actually involved, and went out to Jekyll Island, and this is all documented, this isn't like conspiracy theory stuff, we have the diaries from some of these people, that it was Nelson Aldrich was the senator, and there were a bunch of representatives from the Rockefellers and the Morgans and the Bank of England and so forth, and they all went out to this guy's private retreat on Jekyll Island off the coast of Georgia and met and drafted what later became the act that created the Federal Reserve. Right? So it wasn't like they had a town hall meeting and had a bunch of community activists. It was the big bankers who wrote the legislation that would eventually, regulate them. And the Federal Reserve itself is technically not a part of the U.S. government. It's like a quasi-private bank. It's owned by shareholders, which are actually the banks that are members of the Federal Reserve System. Okay, so it's a really weird system, and and I would argue that one of its functions is to keep fractional reserve banking alive and kicking, whereas I think under a pure market there would be significant checks to that. So anyways, with that digression, Andrea says, so under 100% reserve banking, what would that do to price inflation? And you're right that So when you think about it, you go and you there's $1,000 that you have. Okay, so prices reach a certain level. You now go and you put $1,000 on deposit at the bank. If there's fractional reserve banking, ultimately that your bank makes loans and other banks make loans on top of that, and they can create up to $900 more if there's a 10% reserve requirement. Okay, so excuse me. So it's or actually more than that. Sorry, I'm the other way around. Okay, your bank can lend out 900 and it can create much more. So 9,000 more. So there's that much more money floating around pushing up prices. Okay, so the idea is, in a very real sense, the banking system creates money with this fractional reserve system, and so that makes prices go up. And then when there's a crisis and the money supply shrinks, then the prices crash. So the point is that, yeah, over a general period of time, prices rise more than they otherwise would if you had 100% reserves, but also you get these wild fluctuations that during a boom period, the money supply can grow, and that can push prices up, and then it can crunch, and the money supply can shrink. Okay, so that just exacerbates the booms, and that's what economists. That's how they described and explained the business cycles of like the 1800s. Was that it was just the private banks, by creating and then having the money supply crash, that were causing those cycles.